Hi, this is going to be a summary of Chapter 4, B.F. Skinner's About Behaviorism. And the Chapter 4 is titled Operant Conditioning. When he starts off, Skinner is talking about reinforcing and operant conditioning, even though the chapter is titled Operant Behavior. In operant conditioning, he talks about reinforcing. He says, we're more likely to occur, behaviors are more likely to occur again when we reinforce them. Positive reinforcers, of course, strengthen the behavior that produces it. And he made a correlation to when you get a drink of water, that's a positive reinforcer because it quenches your thirst. A negative reinforcer is something that strengthens behavior that reduces or ends the negative reinforcement. And he talked about a shoe that is pinching your foot. He also said that reinforcing operant conditioning supplements natural selection. And that's kind of what he goes on into quite a bit, is how it's not related to feelings, it's related to natural selection. The second subhead was on feelings and reinforcements. And he said that, because operant conditioning is a product of natural selection, it's not really the feelings that are causing the behaviors. He talks about different kinds of consequences, and he asks the question, what kinds of consequences are reinforcing and why? He talks about our senses. He said most people believe that it feels or sounds, smells, tastes, or looks good. But he says that's not it. He said that the reason we behave is due to survival value, not feelings. He talks about reflexes such as salivation and how we're not salivating because the food tastes good or even because we're hungry. He says it's because of the survival of the species. He goes on and talks about feelings and says that feelings are collateral products of conditions responsible for behavior. But what's really responsible for our behavior, Skinner talks about salt, sugar, and sex. And he says that because of salt and sugar being needed for survival, and obviously competition for a mate, sex, leads to the species survival, that those are really at the core of what has created these natural selection type behaviors. He goes on to talk about hedonism and saying that people act to achieve pleasure or to avoid pain. But he said our behaviors aren't really at all about feelings. They're really more about survival, going all the way back to natural selection. Then he goes on to the next subheading, wants, needs, desires, and wishes. He says that these are mentalistic terms. Want, that's what drives our urges. They're based on biological forces. He said that wants describe a shortage of something, typically, and that needs are a compulsion. They were once originally referred to as meaning a violent force. Got to get that yard work done. Sorry. An event is not reinforcing because it reduces a need, Skinner says. He says food's always rewarding even if we don't need it at that moment. He talks about how deprivation can be changed in ways that aren't reinforcing. So if we deprive somebody from food, we can change it up so that it becomes not reinforcing. The condition of hunger based on evolution survival he says, is what really drives the behavior and what is reinforcing it. He goes on to talk about desire, longing, and yearning. And he said that that is really due to the absence of appropriate behavior. He talks about drives and urges and saying that they come from powerful biological forces such as sex, hunger, and hate. Ideas and will is the next subheading. He says that consequences that shape and maintain a behavior are called an operant. They have become a part of our history, but they might not be present at the time of the behavior. He goes on to distinguish an operant from a reflex. And then he goes on to say that we kind of made up feelings to create a reason for the behaviors. Skinner talks about a person's history is much of what is creating those behaviors at that time. And he feels that people are not truly free because behaviors have been reinforced in the past. He says because a probability is high that a behavior will occur, it doesn't make the response certain. And then he goes on to talk about purpose and intention. Oh, back to ideas and will. He talks about how free will is not really something. He goes on to say that individuals are not really truly free because our behaviors have been already reinforced in the past. And then he moves on to purpose and intervention. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Intention. Purpose and intention. And he goes on to talk about how operant behaviors are actually future-oriented. We're thinking that I'm going to do this in order to do that. Like if I get all my floors washed now, then maybe later I can take a nap. So our operant behaviors are being reinforced by future events. He goes on to discuss schedules. When we set up schedules to reinforce behavior, some behaviors will be reinforced and some will not. And we have to think about that when we're looking at the schedules. When behaviors are always reinforced, we will get a confident and assured person. When we take away those reinforcements, or if it begins not to continue to work, that person will have a tremendous loss of confidence and disappointment. He talks quite a bit about the fact that most reinforcements occur intermittently, and he goes on to discuss a ratio schedule and a variable ratio schedule. And he kind of compares that to gambling, especially, saying that, gambling is because of a variable ratio schedule. You're not going to always get the payoff, but you're thinking sometime in the future it's going to happen. The next heading was aversive stimuli and punishment. Aversive stimuli is where stimuli functions as reinforcement when it's reduced or when it's terminated. Punishment is designed to remove barriers. It's not the same as negative reinforcement, and that's something that we've learned throughout this part of the course. Behaviors have both punishing and reinforcing consequences, and excessive punishment can lack positive reinforcement. It can leave a person vulnerable to depression. Then we move on to structurism. Behavior is not structured. The early studies of behaviorists, they kind of confine themselves to the form of structure. If behaviorism had not replaced feelings and states of mind, then it could maybe be called structurism. However, we found a replacement for feelings and a replacement for states of mind, and I am studying the environment. When functional relationship was not understood between explanations of, when functional relationship was not understood, explanations of phenomena were understood by looking at structures. That's what I don't get it, so I'm going to look at structures. But Skinner is arguing that it's the environment that's going to have the effect, not necessarily just the structures. Then he moves on to the last subheading, the mind in operant behaviors. And I will tell you, this kind of blew my mind. He says that the mind does play an active role in determining behaviors. And he goes on to talk about language. He likes to kind of go back into what language is, where it came from, how it's changed over the years, and how to best use it. He says that when a person responds with autonomous nervous system, that they're under those operant contingencies. He says happiness is a byproduct of operant behaviors. We're looking for this pursuit of happiness, and that we find it as a byproduct. The things that make us happy reinforce us. And he goes on to say that it is things, not feelings, which must be identified, and that those are going to be used in predicting behaviors, controlling behaviors, and interpreting behaviors. Which kind of is it in a nutshell. I know I'm going over my time, but let me leave with the open-ended question. How can we use B.F. Skinner's findings to help us shape behavior, control behavior, and interpret behavior within the classrooms? How do you think his findings of operant conditioning and operant behavior can help us as educators within our classroom? And how true do you think it all is as far as feelings being out of the equation and really just being based on things and evolutionary processes? Think on that. Let me know. Have a great evening. Bye.